Update on the Missouri flood. Last week, as some of you know, I was in Council Bluffs, Glenwood, Sydney, and Hamburg. And the most serious place was to be in Hamburg, but Council Bluffs has some flooding. I followed up this week, this very day, with a meeting with the general that's in charge of the Omaha office of Corps of Engineers, and then the national director of FEMA here in Washington. And the general was here in Washington as well to brief members of Congress. And I raised several issues with the general. One, that the Corps manual on the management of the dams on the Missouri River ought to be rewritten to put more emphasis upon flood control. And secondly, talking with him about the temporary dike around Hamburg and the millions of dollars that it took to build that, and the fact that under existing policy, that dike should be removed 30 days afterwards. In fact, the mayor of Hamburg had to sign a statement to that effect. And I think it's a terrible waste of taxpayers' money to spend that kind of money for a temporary dike to keep 40% of the town from not being flooded, and to save that 40% from being given a lot of money by FEMA when maybe we could have a flood in the spring or down the way a few years and have to build a temporary dike again around Hamburg. So it's there. It ought to be left there, I told him, and I'm going to fight to leave it there. We visited with the FEMA director about how FEMA's coming on meeting the needs of the people, what's available, the money, the amount of money available. Always satisfied that Congress replenishes FEMA money when it runs out, because the federal government's insurer of last resort. And we talked a lot about the qualifications for flood insurance and the July 1st date that they set for a period of time that if you didn't buy crop insurance, or buy flood insurance by that time, then you weren't going to be able to qualify for this particular flood damage. I'm ready for questions on that subject or any other subject. I better take a drink of water while you're asking the question.
Senator Rod Jackson at KGAN in Cedar Rapids. Quick question for you. The president addressing tonight what's expected to be his plan for troop drawdowns in Afghanistan. We're hearing a number anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 by the end of the year. If the president were to call you into the Oval Office and say, Chuck, what's your advice? What would you tell him?
My advice is go to the generals that are in command there and find out how much progress is being made. Can they get by with any less men and women? How are they coming on training the Afghan military and the Afghan police to police their own country? And take the advice of the generals on the drawdown. I think that the president absolutely should not announce specific dates for drawdown, and for sure should not announce a specific date when you might expect the last soldier to leave Afghanistan. And I say both of these dates should not be mentioned because there's a rule of war that you should never telegraph to your enemy what your plans are. Because if you knew that we were going to leave tomorrow, well, you wouldn't do anything today because you'd wait till we were out and then do your dastardly work at that particular time. I also think in terms of the president giving a political speech, because he's trying to satisfy somewheres down the middle between those that think that there shouldn't be any drawdown and those that think we shouldn't be in Afghanistan entirely. And my advice to him would be to ignore both camps. He's commander-in-chief. He's the #1 constitutional officer in charge of our national security. And the national security is the #1 responsibility of the federal government. And consequently, being commander-in-chief, You shouldn't worry about the politics of war. You should do what it takes to protect the American people under the Constitution of the United States, which is the responsibility of the Commander-in-Chief.
Follow-up, if I might. A new Pew poll came out today saying that roughly 56% of Americans polled think that we should get out of Afghanistan, up pretty dramatically from before the news that Osama bin Laden had been killed. How do you rectify that foreign policy that you just stated with an increasing demand of Americans to bring the troops home?
Okay. Well, on the day before Pearl Harbor, 1941, there was a great deal of public opinion that the United States should not get involved in any European war. And then Pearl Harbor happens, and it turned all around. I remember 1991, public opinion was very much against our going into the Persian Gulf War. Once we got in, the public opinion changed. I think public opinion is pretty fluid. Once again, the President has a responsibility to carry out the #1 responsibility of the federal government, which is the protection of the American people and our national security. If politics plays a role in that, then you're compromising the Constitution.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Senator?
This is Michael Lewis from KTIV in Sioux City. Have you been able to make any progress to suspend the decision by the U.S. Postal Service to move Sioux City's mail processing center?
We have not, except for the fact that that the Postal Service would not share the information of their secret study with the people in Sioux City. And a week ago, we were able to receive that information and make it public and give it to the people in Sioux City. But it seems to me that the Postal Service did not serve the people of Sioux City in letting us study that and take that into consideration. So now the congressional delegation, meaning Congressman King and Senator Harkin and I, have pursued that with the Postal Department, but we don't have any response to our latest inquiry.
Thank you.
Senator?
Yes.
Bo Stakes from WQAD, Moline, Quad Cities Market.
Sure.
2 questions. Back to the poll situation. Following 9/11, the polls went through the roof for our war in Afghanistan. Now that we've accomplished our goal of getting Osama, why not start drawing down immediately? Get them out of there.
Yeah. Well, if you heard the answer to my first question, I did not have any argument with the President drawing down. I only suggested that he ought to draw it down in accordance with what our military commanders say that they need to accomplish the goal, and that he shouldn't announce any particular dates. I have nothing against the drawdown. I just hope that the President doesn't say, you know, by a certain date in the year 2013 or 2013 or 2014, we're going to be out of there. Because I think it's a rule of war that you should not tell your enemies what you're going to do. Because if you were Taliban and you had opportunity to wait us out, and then do your bad work after we leave, you're going to have an easier time doing it, and then continue to be a threat to the United States, particularly if the central government of Afghanistan is not strong enough to control the country and to keep their promise to us that they're not going to let have a safe haven for terrorists to train against the United States. The only other thing I would add is that in the meantime, we're training Afghan military and Afghan police, and they can fill in where we leave off. So that's very much a consideration of how much drawdown to have. But if you interpreted my first comment to the first question that I got during this news conference, that I was opposed to drawdown, I'm not opposed to drawdown.
And the follow-up to this, how much training of Afghan troops are we doing, or are we doing more nation building?
I would like to say that in Afghanistan, there's not an opportunity to nation build because of it's really under the tribes of the particular countries. I mean, the tribes of Afghanistan, different tribes, different powers, different power brokers, a lot of competition among tribes. And I think in a country like that, you're going to have a weak central government. But I think that there is going to be respect for a central government that has a well-equipped military. And I get some figures from time to time, but I don't have them in my mind of exactly what the numbers are. But there's a feeling among the people that are training that they're making significant progress. But it's a little more difficult in Afghanistan than it was in Iraq because of the different tribes. And also not having a history of central government control of that country.
And one final question, the post office was brought up a little bit ago. I see now that the post office is going to suspend pension payments to the tune of $800 million. Can you elaborate on that? Can you tell us what's going on with that?
Well, I don't think they can do that without the permission of Congress because the law says that they have to pay into the pension fund and the health care fund and keep it up to date.
Okay.
One
Thank you.
question about the flooding. What was your reaction to the June 1st FEMA deadline for the flood insurance?
Well, there's nothing wrong with the June 1st deadline, but it's whether or not they're taking into consideration when the dams or when the Corps of Engineers decide to release water from this dam or that dam. And remember, there's 5 different control structures up there. That ought to be more of a consideration of when the flood starts or when it doesn't start, and then whether or not you ought to be qualified for insurance.
So what are you doing in Washington to help Iowans that are impacted by the flood?
Well, right now, what we can do is just make sure that FEMA is adequately funded. And right now it is adequately funded, but maybe tomorrow it won't be adequately funded. And so I told the people in Hamburg, as an example, but I say it with a lot of different disasters. You know, an earthquake, hurricane, tornadoes, floods, they're all covered by the same FEMA laws. And once the governor declares a disaster, makes a request to the president, which he did Sunday, then I backed up with a letter to the president asking him to make a quick decision of federal support. Those laws automatically kick in. The help that comes under those laws automatically kick in. So then the money flows according to need and according to law. And then as an example, when the money runs out, it gets replenished. Recently it ran out because of the tornadoes and the flooding on the Mississippi River, and Congress puts in $1 billion. And so if that $1 billion runs out, there'll be more money put in. Now, I don't say to people that are fiscally conservative that that's just a willy-nilly decision. Oh, it's based upon the fact that the policy of our government is that the federal government is going to be an insurer of last resort in those instances where you can't have actuarial basis for insurance, like crop insurance you can have, so farmers better have crop insurance. In a floodplain, if you get a loan for your house, you got to get flood insurance. But maybe for a tornado or a hurricane or an earthquake, you can't predict those things. So it's a little bit different in those instances.
Senator, do you have any idea what a time frame would be before we maybe would see the Corps of Engineers called into hearings about the release of water and the timeliness? You know, I know they were trying to hold some back because of downwater concerns of the Mississippi,
Yeah.
but are we talking September, October, January, and is that soon enough, and what do you think those hearings would look like?
Well, the hearings are going to be a review of the manual that was adopted in the year 2006. And the excuse for the hearings is based on the proposition that this is the worst flooding that we've had, except for 1952, and most of those structures weren't around, I think, in 1952. So the flood, you know, was a 10-day event, where now the flood is going to be a 90-day event. And it's rationale for opening up and reviewing the manual. And you can have hearings that will take place in 1 or 2 days, but the review of the manual and the arguments about how it ought to be changed are going to go on for months. But right now, I think it would be after the floodwaters go down, which is scheduled to be about the middle of August. And then, so that would put you past our summer break in August and get us into September. So I suppose sometime between Labor Day and Thanksgiving would be the appropriate time for the hearings. But the hearings are not going to be the end. The hearings are the beginning.
So then, to go along with that question, what is your reaction to the increased releases at Gavins Point Dam?
Well, I guess I can't answer that question because I don't have the figures in front of me, and if they release this much versus that much, what the impact is downstream. But I think that this is where I'm coming from in a broader answer to your question. The Pick-Sloan projects and the legislation of more than half a century ago was for flood control. And I think there ought to be more weight given to flood control than what seems to have been given.
That's actually what I was going to ask, Senator. How do you determine, and how will this come about, who is more important? Recreation, environment, and flood control? How do you tell somebody in one city over another group that they're more important than the other? And that's essentially what the Corps has to decide, isn't it?
Well, it depends on whether or not it's a life or death situation and damage to property. And I think floods, if there's going to be damage by floods, I think you would compromise the damage to life and limb and property over recreation.
Hi, Senator. It's Dave Price at Channel 13 in Des Moines.
Yes.
Hey, Bloomberg had a new survey out today that's kind of a takeoff of that old question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And the numbers go against what the president would like to see. More people say things are worse than they were before. What do you think, what has gone wrong for him, do you think, since he's been in office on this topic?
I think what's gone wrong with him is he's got an agenda that's anti-growth. And by anti-growth, I mean getting out of this recession that we're in. He could get free trade treaties passed with Panama, South Korea, and Colombia right now if he'd send them up here. He could announce, instead of being for tax increases, say that we're not going to increase taxes because that's what he said in 2008 after he was elected, even though he ran on a platform to increase taxes and make it more certain that we aren't going to have a big tax increase, which you don't do when you're in a recession. He needs to quit issuing a whole bunch of new anti-growth regulations that are coming out of the bureaucracy. He needs to make clear that we're going to have a constitutional amendment for a balanced budget, that we're going to do something about entitlements. And basically, this all adds up to one word. His policies lead people to believe that we have a very uncertain future. And he needs to do things that are going to bring certainty to the future and predictability to the future, because there's a lot of money in corporations that they're willing to hire or spend to hire people, but they aren't going to spend it. And he ought to suspend a lot of these health care reform proposals because they're a cost to business. And so business doesn't know that. There's a lot of uncertainty. So he needs to bring certainty to the economy, and we'll get this unemployment down so fast that he might even get reelected.
Well, Senator, having said that then, so do you think he created this perception in that, as you know, I mean, he extended tax cuts and even added to them with the payroll tax reductions for a while there, so he hasn't increased those taxes like he campaigned he would. So are you saying at this point he needs to just go out there and say, I'm not going to raise taxes and to clear up that perception? Or
well, that's only in regard to taxes. Don't forget I mentioned the trade issues, I mentioned the health care issues, I mentioned the regulatory issues, and taxes is only a part of it, but a big part of it. But also don't forget that the only reason we didn't raise taxes, he wanted to raise taxes last summer, but after the election, there was a whole new attitude here in Washington, so he accepted Congress passing no tax increases. But he's still for tax increases. Well, whether or not you pass them or not is one thing, but people out there think we are going to pass them, and that's why there's the uncertainty. Anybody else? Okay, thank you all very much.
Thank you, sir.